The following is a sponsored episode.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. I'm so excited to be joined by my friend Farya Barlas today. If you haven't met Farya, we actually originally connected through a community called the Mixer Mind. I've gotten to hang out with her in Mexico, and she is just truly an incredible person. I cannot wait for you all to dig into her brain and hear how she talks about hidden patterns that are keeping very capable founders and entrepreneurs stuck. So that's a little teaser, but just a quick intro to Farya. Farya Barlas is a chartered psychologist and trauma expert with 23 years of clinical experience. She's the host of the From Trauma to CEO podcast, which I'm subscribed to. You absolutely have to add it to your rotation. And she's also the creator of The Method, the first ever framework to bring clinical trauma-informed psychology into business growth. She helps high-achieving founders and coaches find the hidden pattern, keeping them stuck, break through the ceiling they keep hitting, and finally scale. Farya, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad and excited to be here, to be seeing you, and to be speaking with you about these important topics.
So important, especially I think uncovering why some businesses stall at a certain level and the fact that it doesn't always have to do with strategy. I think we always try to fix, our growth ceilings with more strategy, more tactics, more mentorship. But I really love how you're offering this, this door number 3 where you're like, actually, it could be this trauma pattern that is running your mind in the background. And you have that deep understanding of psychology and trauma to be able to help people move past it. So I actually would love to maybe start there. How does someone even tell if the problem they're running into is a strategy problem versus a pattern problem? What's the difference there?
I love this question, mainly because a lot of the times most of the time actually, people identify any issues that will come up with something that they can do something about, right? Which is usually a strategy or something that they need to improve or a new routine or something that they have a full kind of behavioral control over. Whereas I would say the first thing, one of the easiest way to be able to determine whether something is a strategy or a pattern problem is to really figure out whether the first one is, if you're not entirely sure, or if you're confused as to what your next step should be, or you don't know what you're supposed to be doing, chances are that you may be lacking information or maybe you're lacking a strategy, right? But a lot of the times people, when they're pressed and pushed, they do know what the next step is supposed to be. They do know what they're supposed to be doing. It's just that for some reason, it's just not happening. Or I usually get people, my clients, I get them to do this very, very, very simple test. I say, well, if you were to coach somebody or your own client in 5 minutes or less as to what they're supposed to be doing next, would you be able to do that? And if they can, then you don't have a strategy problem because you're clear as to what you're supposed to be doing. You're able to articulate it to somebody else as well. So these are like just very, very basic on the surface ways of determining whether or not something is a pattern problem. In my experience, honestly, most women that I work with are very capable. They're very, very smart. They know what they're supposed to do. And to be honest with you, these days information is just so accessible, right? It's everywhere. I don't think that somebody is going to be like stuck because they just don't know what their next strategy is supposed to be at that level of scaling. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
But, again, if there's uncertainty around it, the best way to know is to figure out whether it's something that you do know what to do and you just, for some reason, you can't bring yourself to do it, or whether you genuinely are confused, in which case, yes, sure, the best way is to find the next right strategy for yourself.
Mm. And that resistance of knowing what you're supposed to do and not wanting to do it is something I'm very, very familiar with. What are some other common patterns or pitfalls that you have observed in the clients that you work with, Farya, in terms of those same types of patterns, whether it is like a specific example resistance that you've seen or just other, types of behaviors like that?
I would tell you this, right? My kind of work has been focused a lot, specifically on high achievers, founders, entrepreneurs. These are the types of people that they don't really present as, having, symptoms. They don't just, freeze and scroll. I mean, you might, but that's not typical. That might not be the main problem, right? So some of the symptoms usually come up in what I call functional freeze. It means that you look like you're very productive, in fact, because a lot of the women that I work with, they don't have a problem with productivity. They're doers, right? They are getting things done. But they get stuck in not actually attending to the thing that would move the needle and actually focusing on all the other things that will keep you occupied and busy, but not really kind of making that shift. And there is a reason for that, because we all have a definition of how we all have an invisible setting of how good things are allowed to get for us, right? So if it gets to that edge, we don't start to fail suddenly, but we just start like pulling back unconsciously. We start to sort of, it's that one thing, that offer that we just don't put out, or it's going to be that one particular client that we don't follow up, things that would actually move the needle. So some of the ways that I know, and this is actually a bit of a disadvantage for high achievers, because they don't present as something is wrong or something is not functioning properly, right? So the way that I recognize it is when somebody is, for example, hyper independent, and then they may be rewarded as, oh my God, they are amazing leaders, right? Because they just get everything done. But in reality, if you really dig deep, you'll see that it's the inability to delegate, for example, right? Or the lack of trust to be able to allow anybody else to be intimate enough with your business to actually help you. I mean, this is a very common one. And I work with men and women, but I say this mostly about women, that it's a lot of the time it's very difficult for them to ask for help. They get everything done themselves. They get, super responsible. And actually, a lot of these qualities are what led them to succeed in the first place. So it's very difficult for them to let it go now, because they associate that with succeeding, right? But then the issue or the question that I always get people to ask themselves is not so much what did your past programming or patterns or trauma is preventing you from doing now. No, I always ask, what did trauma or those patterns made you exceptionally good at, right? That it's now costing you something, right? Because you're so good at it that it's becoming costly, right? So I'm kind of looking at trauma in high achievers in a very, very different way. I don't see it as, okay, it's gonna, your trauma is preventing you from succeeding. I see it as, actually, it's you're going all in with one or two, characteristics, and you're missing out on all the other magic that you've got going on inside of you or the creativity that you've got going on. And yeah, so I always say this as well, and I will stop, that your trauma and your creativity, they live in the same place inside of you. So if you can't access the depth of the trauma, you're not accessing the depth of your creativity or your magic or what you're supposed to be doing in this world.
Oh, mic drop. Wow, I'm already blown away. I'm so stunned by that reframe that you gave, Farya, because I think, just even speaking from like personal experience, sometimes when people are like, oh, well, what do you think is the trauma that's holding you back from XYZ, right? I think that line of questioning is especially difficult for high achievers to answer often, because they don't identify with someone who is not successful or who is, struggling, let's say, with something. So I think for you to flip it on its head, instead of being like, hey, name your deficiency, right? You're instead saying, hey, name me your strength, like what makes you successful, but let's see how like it's just one piece of the pie and there's so much more that you're not tapping into. I think that reframe is so brilliant. I've never heard anybody say it quite like you did just there. So just want to point that out for our listeners. Maybe that's a big takeaway for you as well. But, in your 23 years of clinical experience, you have seen people really hold tightly to these patterns and trauma responses because it did make them successful or did once keep them safe. So, how would you talk to the business owner who maybe is more similar to the person I just described, that doesn't necessarily view themselves as a traumatized person? Maybe they have had a relatively, in their view, good life and they don't really necessarily feel like they have trauma patterns to begin with. How do you work with somebody who has that perspective?
Well, actually, that's most of the people that I work with, and nearly, well, I would say all, if not, most of them, if not all, they don't identify with I've been abused or I've had some. I mean, some people would obviously experience that as well. But I think with the issue with high achievers and people who are very, who've got the grit, like especially women, right, that just go getters, we have to one of the biggest things that I have been doing is to perhaps redefine or the popular understanding of what the trauma is, right? And maybe give it my own new definition of it. So the way that I see trauma is not necessarily it's a catastrophic thing that has happened to you when you were small. That again may very well be the case for a lot of people. But in this case, I'm talking about, not the event or things that happened to you, but actually who you thought you had to become in order to be okay. Right. So if you're growing up in an environment where, I mean, that's definitely my story, right? Being independent and strong was definitely something that my parents really valued. So from the get-go, from being very small, I knew that that's the way to get their, approval. And we are children. We don't think my mom's going to approve of me. We think, oh, my mom's going to love me more. Right.
Mhm.
So we associate that with something deeper. So then these like very micro things, they're not big things, right? But then we embody them. We sort of become, we develop that into our identity rather than actually knowing. I might not even be. I mean, I am always defined by everybody as very strong, but sometimes I'm like, well, actually, I don't even know if I am or if I had to be. It's the
Right.
truth. Because, it's kind of looking at who you thought you had to become to
Mhm.
belong, to feel not rejected. And this is not just to do with families. This is or your family. This could be a loving, normal family. But it's just these micro messages that we might pick up as children, or when we are obviously in different settings as well, in a school or mm, with our friends. I will tell you one more thing that it seems so small, so small. I was the youngest out of all my cousins, right? And my cousins were all like, they were all like 3 or 4 years older. They were cooler and it was just so, they always knew everything. All right. So I thought, right? Because I was just
Right.
small and they were always trying to get rid of me, like in games or plays or whatever. Rightly so, because they were older and they were talking about cool things. And I would just come in with silly things or whatever. And so I always thought, and I remember this incident where I learned something. I can't even remember what it was for the life of me. And I ran to them very excited because they were talking to these other people as well. And I wanted to show off a little bit. So I ran to them and I'm like, guys, I know so and so, right? Like this information that I learned. And they just turned around and they were like, oh, that's so silly. Obviously everyone knows that. Like you just learned that
Mhm.
now. Because, obviously, they were older than me and it was
Yeah.
probably silly to them. But it seems so small, right? It seems like, okay, well, it's just like children playing with each other.
Mhm.
But I noticed this coming up for me when I entered university. And I remember all throughout, I was very quiet. And a lot of my friends were like, did you not know the answer or whatever? And I always knew it, but I was like, well, yeah, but it's not, if I say it, everybody knows it. It's just so obvious. Why would raise my hand? And then imagine how that would have impacted me in my business if I didn't really look at that, right? I
Yeah.
never putting myself out there, never saying the things that are my ideas because I think, okay, well, everybody knows it. And
Right.
if you don't know, like this is the pattern that you're carrying, like a silly little pattern that you didn't even think about, and yet you're carrying it in your business and it's costing you in your own business. And I think that's the part that when people start working with me, I think that's the most surprising part for them. Like how much of our unspoken or invisible patterns and blocks are actually costing us real money and real growth and real impact in our businesses. So yes, trauma is not going to, long story short, trauma is not something that you will come out and say, okay, I had this abusive sort of background. Again, that might have been the case, and that's a whole other thing to work with. But generally for high achievers, the reason why, I mean, I'll go as far as saying the reason why we are high achievers to begin with, it was always trauma led, because
Mm,
it was always something that we wanted to do better. It was something that we wanted to kind of, it's trauma became our invisible superpower in a way.
yeah.
But it has a limit, right? It only goes as far as it does. And then we have to look at, changing and tapping into our other abilities as well.
That's so interesting. Thank you for breaking it down with a personal example too of like that through line. That's so, I wonder, did you notice that in university? Did you recognize that pattern at that moment in time, or did it take you many years after to actually connect the dots between that offhand comment one of your cousins made to how you kind of showed up through early adulthood?
Well, actually, no, I did not realize it. I realized that I was always holding myself back, and I was
Yeah.
thinking that everything I'm saying is just so obvious and everybody knows. By the
Yeah.
way, it was not obvious and nobody knew. It turned out, right?
Plot
But
twist.
but I tell you what's so funny actually is that when I was writing some of the themes around what I wanted to speak about in my own podcast, that this
Mm.
came up. I had not made that link up until 6 months, 7 months ago,
Oh,
right?
wow.
Yeah, I kind of knew that this is something is holding me back, but I didn't
Yeah.
realize that it was just this constant. It wasn't also, by the way, it's not just one throwaway comment, because it's important that people understand that it's not just every small thing that happened now is impacting you. It's when it becomes like a pattern and it systematically, kind of impacts you. So it would have been my cousin constantly sort of going, oh, well, me feeling like I need to constantly prove myself that I know
Mm,
something that they don't, and it was an ongoing process. So yes, no,
right.
sometimes it doesn't come up until much later. Sometimes it doesn't come up until, well, actually, a lot of the times it doesn't get resolved until you actively look for it and you actively try to resolve it by not looking at the wrong answers, i.e., just looking for just a strategy and really looking at other things that could be impacting your business as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, by the way, for clarifying that. It's not, like you said, just a throwaway comment, but it's a repetition that kind of ingrains that into your programming. For a lot of people that, have these patterns or behaviors or, learned programming, if you will, they do apply traditional business advice to try to kind of get out of this, like more strategy, more discipline, more accountability. But you've actually said that this just gives that survival pattern better tools. And I thought that was like a really interesting way to, position that. Why is this true? And what should someone be doing instead? So like instead of falling into, typical business advice and just trying to kind of like mask over it, what is your go-to approach when you're working with clients?
Well, advice is great, right? There's
Mm,
nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It is just that when you're focusing on business advice, you're really focusing on a behavior, right? You're assuming that something needs to, or people focus on the gap, right? Okay, there might be a gap in your offer or in your, you need a better system, better funnel, or a better routine, even, a mindset routine or something that is behavioral. But behavior is not the thing. I mean, you can change the behavior, but you don't really get to the source of what is causing that behavior. So what then happens is that most women that I work with, they don't, they're not missing anything. In
mm,
fact, they're doing too much of that one thing that keeps them safe, which is, whatever tactic or survival strategy it is, usually is productivity. So I feel like they don't need more, something to be added to the things that they're already doing. Again, if you're, let's say, if you're right at the beginning of setting up your business or you're pivoting or what, of course, you need all the advice and strategies and everything you need to kind of gain. And even if you're in a seasoned business owners, there's always room to receive these. I just think that it should not come at the cost of you not looking at what's actually moving all this, what is behind your motivation or what is preventing you from actually getting up and increasing your prices, for example. It's not a strategy. I cannot tell you how many times, I have worked with people that have been told that they have a pricing issue or they have an offer issue or they have a funnel issue. And, that may very well be on a sort of on a surface that looks the case. However, it doesn't matter how much you tell somebody to increase their prices. If their nervous system is set at, okay, this is not going to be safe for me to move forward, that level of success is not safe for me or for my intergeneration or my lineage, like, especially if you're the first kind of generation of gaining this level of success. Of course, you have to face so many different obstacles. You have to open so many different ceilings. And these are all psychological. They're not business, ceilings as such.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And you bring up this word safety a lot. And one thing that's interesting that you submitted prior to our interview that I want to kind of dig into is you basically described how people's relationships with their own business often mirror their interpersonal relationships with actual, human beings. And like whatever they learned about, like you said, safety or closeness or control or trust in themselves and in other people, the same way that those factors play in their relationships with people, it also gets brought over into business. And I am just kind of starting to learn about the different attachment patterns. I know that's been like really hot on social media in the last 2 years. Like everyone's like, I'm anxious attachment. What are you? Or like, people like talk about that a lot as it pertains to their personal relationships. But you actually have kind of noticed how someone's attachment pattern plays out in their business and how it also, like you said, caps their ceiling for growth. Can you explain that a little bit more in depth for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in my experience, what I see always is that people's businesses is the most honest relationship they ever have, right? Because your business does not pretend to be okay just to, just not to hurt your feelings, right? So I think that a lot of people, when they enter entrepreneurship, which by the way, you have to have a certain personality to enter entrepreneurship, I reckon, right? But somebody who does and they create their own business, they're actually bringing in all these other aspects. Who they are in their business is who they are everywhere else, right? They're bringing in all these aspects of their attachment, the way they relate to others, the way they relate to their own sense of deserving or having the amount of audacity that you have when you're in other settings versus your business. You're bringing all of that to your business. There is no way that you can be somebody who is, I don't know, shy or, or a people pleaser in your other relationships, your friendships and, in your relationship with your family members. And yet you come in and you're all courageous and you're happy to disappoint people. They don't go hand in hand because it's just you're the same person. You're bringing in the same patterns. You're bringing in the same attachment style, and that actually goes with your relationship with business, relationship with success, relationship with money. If you're used to always sort of chasing for approval, love, affection, chances are that you're going to be chasing. You're going to constantly chase your business to trying to give you that. So you don't expect your business to be producing, I don't know, like that money for you. You expect to constantly be chasing it. Or if you have issues around trust, then of course you're going to bring that to your business, with the people that you work with, whoever you want to employ to try to help you. I had a client that I actually talked about it in my one of my episodes in my podcast, and that's the way that this relationship thing came about was that every time she always wanted to focus on her business, which is great. This is, usually where people hide, and this, and never wanted to talk about her personal relationship with her partner, because she thought, well, how's that relevant to my business, right? And then when we looked at it a little bit deeper, and anytime somebody tries to avoid or somebody just thinks that something is not relevant, I know that it's directly relevant. That's how I know. So
The harder they hide it, the deeper you dig. Yeah.
exactly. So I did insist, and then we went there, and it turned out that she was not happy in her relationship, and she was tolerating with a lot from him, right? Tolerating with him, not giving her what she needs, and all the other things. And then the penny just dropped. It was exactly how she was showing up in her business as well. She was tolerating so much from the business itself, from her business partner, from, her clients. And it was actually, again, costing her money. So this is when I make these links between, hey, your attachment style or your relationships has a direct link to your income or how much you're earning. People don't believe it, but it is actually directly linked. So when we started working with, okay, let's look at what's happening. Why do you feel like you need to tolerate that? And what parts of the business you're tolerating? That's the time that she started letting go of aspects of the business that was not working for her anymore, but she was still holding on to that. So, I mean, that's just one simple example, but there are so many different ways as to how we show up in our business in the same way that we show up in our relationships. And also, one more thing as well, it's also the way that we parent our business, right? A lot of people just hold on to their businesses like for dear life. Like they have to constantly be on it. They have to monitor. They have to, it's a very, as you mentioned earlier, it's a very anxious attachment style towards your business. And then I came up with this other thing, which I thought was brilliant. Anyway, it was that a lot of people are trauma bonding with their businesses, right? And I know that the trauma bonding is so popular outside, but it's true. I see that people have such a toxic relationship with their businesses. This is not to say that the business is not making them money. It is, but it might come at the cost of, let's say, their health, their relationships, their relationship with themselves. They feel guilty taking an hour off to just do what they love to do. They feel bad resting. To me, this is a toxic relationship you have with your business, because you can have all the success without constantly having to compromise something or another because of your own past trauma and your past program.
Wow, so illuminating. And I bet in these examples that you've shared, Farya, that at least one, if not many listeners can kind of see themselves reflected in the patterns or relationships or, whatnot that you just described. I would love for us to wrap up our conversation on maybe helping people better understand when they work with you. How would you describe like the service of work you do? Because like some people listening to this might be like, okay, so if I work with Farya, is it like going to therapy, but the focus is on business and its relation to me? Is this more of a coaching container? Is this more of a, a different thing we haven't discussed yet? Like I would just love for you to help our community better understand like what makes working with you within your practice so unique.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not the traditional therapy, because what I found is traditional therapy can, as beautiful as it is, and of course that's where I come from, that's my core foundation, but it can keep you stuck in that process of healing for the rest of your life without actually you taking any actions. And what I find again with a lot of, coaching in a traditional coaching industry is that you're constantly being pushed to move forward and take actions by dysregulating yourself and without looking at what's underneath. So working with me, and this is what I found, what I felt was missing really. And again, I didn't really set out to work specifically in this lane, but it just, as it happened, this is what I've been doing. I've been working with so many founders, entrepreneurs, and this is how these containers came about. really as a result of the need for it, as the necessity for it. Anyway, so this is not a traditional therapy. We will not be digging into your childhood for the rest of your lives, to just for the sake of looking back. No, but it's also not traditional coaching. So it's a combination of so many different things that, it's mentorship, and it's like a container where we will look at everything that you bring in with your business, but we don't look at it from just the business strategy lens or, motivational or mindset lens. We will look at it from a trauma lens, which is completely different. And I haven't seen anybody else doing the exact same thing that I'm doing. So in that way, it's a little bit unique. And maybe that's why it's a little bit unknown as to, is this going to be therapy or is this coaching? It's none of them. It's it's an expansion. It's an experience that you go through. Usually people come in with one or many specific problems in relation to their businesses, sometimes in how they show up in themselves. And then as we focus on that business problem, other things will reveal themselves as well. So I never really plan and go, okay, we're going to look at your childhood or we're going to look at your patterns. I don't. I just say, okay, bring me whatever that's keeping you stuck right now. And then from that, I will tell you exactly what your pattern is and how to move beyond that pattern. That's kind of pretty much in a nutshell what I do.
I love that you've basically created your own modality, right? And I think it's really great too that you kind of called out just some of the reasons that maybe the more traditional modalities like therapy or just strict traditional coaching haven't perhaps been working out well for people who have pursued either of those paths. And so I'm really glad that you've created your own lane in which you can really help identify and move people beyond something. I love that path forward is a clear focus for you. But like you said, with the actual trauma-informed understanding of clearing out the root problem rather than just giving people behavioral things to fix.
This is also the distinction because a lot of people are worried. A lot of founders, high achievers, and entrepreneurs that I work with are worried that if they enter this kind of work, right, they're going to lose their edge. Right? If you're gonna be all soft and mushy and whatever, that they think they're gonna lose their edge, which is what they need to succeed. And this is exactly how, again, this kind of work is different because we're actually going to be using all your superpowers to move the needle and to move forward, because the plan, the healing thing, and the working and therapy, healing is a foundation. I always say, but expansion is the destination. What we want is growth. And, so I don't want just the healing part. I want to use that to go, okay, how good is your business going to get? How good is your life going to get? And really sort of push forward with that expansion, growth, and success. So success is the big part of my work. It's not settling with just healing. And I think that I just wanted to
that's so good.
Huge difference for me anyway.
Huge difference. I'm really glad you brought that up. Okay, write that down. Healing is the foundation, expansion is the destination. That's so good. I think that should be your tagline for if you don't have one. That's really, really good. And I think what entices me most, just even hearkening back to like one of the earliest things you said during our conversation today was the fact that whatever brought us success is really only utilizing like just a small percentage of our superpowers. And like you said, there's so much more magic within us that we're not even consciously aware that we're not utilizing. It kind of reminds me of, I actually never saw the movie, but like that idea of the Limitless movie where it's like, oh, you're only using 2% of your brain's capabilities and there's so much more that you're not tapping into. It kind of reminds me of that. And I think that is actually in and of itself a fun discovery journey. I'm sure of people working with you being like, oh, I don't even know the other hidden skills that I haven't even harnessed in my business to help me be more successful because I've been so locked into only these like two things that have gotten me where I am. So incredible. I am so appreciative of all the life-changing work that you're doing for entrepreneurs and also for sharing your wisdom with us today. So tell our listeners, where else can they connect with you? Obviously, we brought up your podcast. Again, that's From Trauma to CEO. Make sure you add it to your listening rotation. But where else can our community connect with you, Farya?
Thank you. Firstly, thank you so much for having me. It's always fun speaking with you. So thank you. It's been amazing. So yes, you can find me on my website, Faryabarlas.com, or come and say hello on Instagram. It's Faryabarlas.psychologist. And of course, my podcast is where, all the magic happens.
Yes, incredible. And you're nearing like that 50 episode milestone, which is huge, by the way. So, congratulations. I know that podcasting is truly, truly a labor of love. It is like one of the hardest content mediums. So, I'm so proud of you for getting to where you are already with that. All of Farya's links, by the way, will be below in the show notes. So make sure you click through, check those out, say hello, and reach out if there's something that's been keeping you stuck and you want to really identify what that underlying pattern is through a different lens than maybe you've worked with other people before. So, anyways, Farya, thank you once again. And thank you all for tuning in. We'll catch you in next week's episode.